Welcome back. Hopefully everybody's having a good Labor Day weekend. Today being Sunday, yes. We're going to carry on to the next installment for lightweight drivetrain components make you go faster. Now, so far you can see the topics covered in previous videos. The transmission, clutch, and flywheel, I'm going to be diving in a little bit in each video, so I have not marked those off. In the last video, I had a brain fart remembering the name of the flex plate. So there's the flywheel and flex plate. The flywheel is used with a manual transmission. The flex plate is used with a torque converter. For whatever reason during the video, I forgot about that. Now, if you actually look at a factory flywheel, a cast iron or steel flywheel, they actually weigh approximately the same amount as a torque converter does when it's filled with fluid. Depending on the actual size of the torque converter, typically torque converters used for performance or street racing type applications are going to be an 11 to 10 inch or even smaller. Your factory 13 inch torque converter filled with fluid will actually weigh more than the factory flywheels that are made out of steel. Now, in circle track racing, once again, to lighten up the entire rotating mass, because of the restricted power the engines can make, you want to be able to transfer as much power as you possibly can through the driveline to the rear wheels. So lightweight components that are used for sustained RPM can be lightened up, including the flywheel. So instead of utilizing a steel flywheel, you can utilize an aluminum flywheel with a steel insert for the actual contact patch between the clutch and the flywheel. Clutches also come in different variations. Believe it or not, some of the higher end models, they're stripped down to where there's not much in them at all. You might, instead of having 20 fingers that are activating the clutch up and down and working against the springs, you might only have 3. Again, that's for sustained racing, where once you are in gear, you stay in that gear. It is not necessarily for drag racing where you're shifting 2, 3, or 4 times down the drag strip, or within a street driving circumstance where you're going light to light, having to press the clutch pedal, so on and so forth. Now, there have been inventions over the years to where the clutch can be engaged the entire time. Through a synchronized transmission, they will not actually turn until they are pulled into gear, and you don't actually have to clutch or use the foot feed to shift between gears, whether it's a gate system or a Lenco type transmission. The synchronized gears within the transmission are able to slide in without actually having to depress the clutch to allow it to release some of the pressure going into the gear drives. Automatic transmissions. Now, in the previous video, I mentioned that the torque converter weighs quite a bit, and all of the internal components, I gave you guys some homework with a Kool-Aid container. If you can spin the spoon around in an empty container, and then if you fill it with Kool-Aid or your lemonade and spin it around, you can feel the resistance. That's the system of going from mechanical to hydraulic multiplication back into mechanical multiplication of the engine horsepower through the tail shaft and to the rear axle. Now, in previous videos, I've mentioned that one of the transmissions we've actually used for drag racing, even though I don't like automatics for drag racing, we actually utilized a 2-speed automatic, but it was not driven with utilizing a torque converter. Okay, so many of you probably do not know about this because it's not something common, especially with street-driven cars. It is something only for track. I have attempted to use them on the street, and they go through, they burn up the fluid pretty fast, but that's a circle-matic transmission. So the pump of the drive of the automatic transmission is being turned by the engine. There is no torque converter. It's direct drive. The coupling between the rear of the crankshaft and the pump is 1-to-1. There is no torque multiplication whatsoever. Now, the advantage to that is that they have no stall speed. Whatever RPM you release the pedal at, that's immediate power going into your transmission. Okay, so they're very hard on transmissions, but when you're utilizing a torque flight or a 2-speed power glide type transmission, that's actually the quickest reacting transmission that you can get, even compared to manual transmissions. Manual transmissions, when you release the clutch, depending on how much resistance there is from the driveline and how much power is being produced by the engine, there is a certain amount of slip. And for anybody that's ever messed around with, extremely high horsepower engine combinations and lower gear ratios in cars and heavier cars, you realize that dropping the clutch will actually burn the clutch up in a very quick amount of time. Sometimes to the point where it's only going to last a few races. It's not going to necessarily last an entire season. So as I've preached in these videos, having a reverse engineer, knowing what's behind the clutch within the driveline, will actually predict how well the performance of the drive, whether it's an automatic torque converter, direct drive coupling, or a clutch system, will work. So hopefully you guys understand that. When it comes to the aluminum with the steel insert, those are for sustained racing, something that will be in gear for a longer period of time, whether it be Trans Am or circle track racing, something where you're staying in the top gears longer. Now, can they handle the shifting of third and fourth gear or whatever the top gears are within Trans Am series? Absolutely. The typical aluminum flywheel will be about 25 to 30 pounds, where the steel variant, depending on the diameter, whether it's a truck or a car variation, can weigh over 50 pounds. So you're almost reducing the rotating mass by half. So almost a 50% reduction in weight of rotating mass. Now on manual transmissions, no matter how many speeds they have, if you don't need the gears, you can actually remove them. If they're not directly related to the power input being addressed by the engine through the gears of the transmission. Say first gear. A lot of times first gear will make direct contact with the drive gears, bypass second and third, and actually be joined in with fourth gear or a final drive. In a case where you don't need first gear, you can actually eliminate it. You can actually remove the gear. So again, you're reducing the amount of rotating mass. In an automatic transmission, there's obviously components within the transmission that can be lightened up, but you can't remove them necessarily. You can use thinner materials or materials made out of lighter components, different kind of clutch packs, so on and so forth. But you cannot necessarily remove an entire clutch pack in an automatic transmission for the transmission to work. It's a complete system working off of a valve body and the direction of the fluid through the transmission. A manual transmission can have the gears actually removed. A lot of times in circle track racing, first gear will remain. They will eliminate second, third gear. So if you guys are ever at a local short track race, you notice the cars can leave fairly quick from a standstill, but they immediately shift into fourth and it bogs the engine down. And then it isn't until they reach a closer speed to what they're racing at that the engine is able to accelerate the car. There's a dogginess to it, and it doesn't accelerate very fast. That's because they keep first gear for just transporting through the pits. And while they're racing, they only use fourth gear. Or they'll eliminate fourth gear and only use third gear depending on the rear gear ratio and the composition of the actual transmission. Any component that's spinning that is not being used can be eliminated. So whether it's actually grinding the gears down to where they're only the size of the main drive shaft to eliminating that section of the transmission entirely, you can remove a lot of weight. Now, that is for sustained racing like circle track, something where you're using the final gears to actually accelerate the car. And drag racing, where you're utilizing at least two gears, you can't necessarily eliminate too many of them. With the race car, the Ironman competition for the 8th mile, I was only utilizing two gears, second and third. Okay. Within that distance, I didn't need first or fourth gear in order to accomplish the race. Now, when I switched to the quarter mile race, okay, both the final gear drive and the rear axle ratio needs to be changed. Okay, so again, whenever I go from an 1/8 mile race to a 1/4 mile race, I have to remove the center section of the rear axle to change from a 513 gear down to a 488. And I utilize the 4th gear that is still within the transmission. So I have not eliminated 2 gears. I just don't use the 4th gear. But realize typically the final gear ratio in either a manual or automatic transmission is 1:1. There is no torque multiplication created by that gear ratio. It isn't done until the rear end differential gear ratio that multiplication is occurring with a manual transmission. So if you're, no matter what transmission you're using, there's a few options that you have. Determining how much you're actually driving your car or using it on the street compared to the track is also going to be, again, the reason why you choose a certain transmission and the amount of maintenance that you want to do to it. Automatic transmissions, it's gotten to the point now with the General Motors Turbo 350s and 400s, you could pretty much turn off the lights and I could rebuild one. Okay, that's how many I've had to deal with over the years. Even though I don't race a whole lot of automatic transmissions, but with the Circle-matic transmission, I found very quickly, depending on the transmission I was using, it would burn up the fluid fairly quick, the clutch pack, so on and so forth. So within a short amount of time, within 1 year that I actually ran the Circle-matic transmission on the street, I rebuilt the transmission 3 different times. So again, diving into it, taking everything out, putting it back together, I got fairly efficient at it. But I am no means a transmission expert, okay? I just buy whatever works, put it in, and expect it to drive. It's easy enough. Let's see here. So again, depending on the design and the intended purposes are going to dictate what type of transmission works the best for you. Now, the longevity and strength of transmissions is no different than the rear axle. In the previous video I mentioned the GM 12 bolts, a 9-inch nodular design. Even your factory transmissions have a different level of performance they can handle. You need to do enough research to figure out if somebody has an example of what they're using it for, so on and so forth, because with a transmission being mounted literally in, just underneath the driver's compartment, if anything happens to the transmission and you're utilizing a unibody car or something with a factory steel floor, those components can come right through. Any of you extremely high RPM launch type racing individuals, you realize that if a clutch explodes, you've seen multiple instances where that clutch disc will actually go right through the bell housing and up through the firewall of the car, sometimes even exiting the car. Now the rest of the components along with that can actually come into the driver's compartment. Most sanctioning bodies require either a shield or having some kind of a reinforcement within the drive shaft tunnel or the transmission tunnel to be added into the original floor. So again, make sure you check with your rules, no matter if you're circle track racing or dirt track racing, to their requirements. Those rules are there for a reason because they've found out throughout history, their experience, that when something happens, it'll save you. So if you like, not walking around like a pirate with a wooden peg leg, make sure that you're applying to the rules. On the street, once again, it all depends on the combination. What is your final goal? Do you want a twin turbo car that's pushing 2,500 or 3,000 RPM on the street? Well, the rules that apply on the track should be the same rules that you use to build the car, even for street use. Easy enough. With that, I'm enjoying the cookout today, so I gotta go switch the grill around, and we'll come back and we'll cover a little bit more about the actual drive shafts. This should be a fairly short video. Catch you in a little bit.